So, Mr. Rex Alexander, man after my own heart. He's a veteran rotary wing and fixed wing pilot and A&P. He's an aviation manager with 40 years of military, general, and commercial aviation experience. He's an experienced pilot, instructor pilot, safety manager, base manager, a regional manager, an auditor, airframe and power plant technician, educator, and trainer. He's a man of many hats. He is currently the senior consultant member and co-founder of Heli Experts International, LLC. He's an alumni of Parks College of Aviation at St. Louis University, and he's a Foreign Army Warrant Officer, Aero Scout helicopter pilot, and instructor pilot of the Army and the National Guard. So, without further ado, I would like to take a second and present Mr. Rex Alexander's certificate for presenting today.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you.
Much appreciated.
And we will turn the show over to him. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. Much appreciated. I know the weather's extremely nice, and I can tell by the crowd that it's extremely nice because nobody wants to come into the air conditioning today. That's okay. Yesterday was an awesome day. I was here. I've been here for a couple days. Took my first flight in a B-17 yesterday. Saw Oshkosh from the nose of a B-17. What a phenomenal opportunity that was. What we're going to look at today is accident prevention from a human factors element. So in looking at what we're going to do, this is based on research that I've been involved with. I serve as a volunteer on the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team's Human Factors Group, also the International Helicopter Safety Team. I work with Helicopter Association International. I also work with the National Fire Protection Association. I do a lot of collaborative work with the NTSB. We just finished a big research project with a group. It was the International Society of Aviation Safety Inspectors. We reviewed 649 fatal accidents, primarily in the helicopter world, over a 15-year period to figure out what are the common threads. So we identified a lot of different items that were common threads. I kind of looked at it and took it a different step further in looking at something specific in the just culture and how that affects our attitude. So we looked at the undesirable attitudes in a lot of these accident situations that were the underlying, I won't say cause, but major factor for allowing the accident to occur in the first place. So I always tell people, I said, brace yourself. This is a touchy-feely seminar. Not so much like this. More so like this. It is a down and dirty, in your face, upside the head with a baseball bat, touchy-feely course. All right? Because a lot of these accidents were totally and completely preventable. Somebody somewhere had a piece of information. If only we had that piece of information supplied early enough, we would have prevented the accident. So in 2011, I don't know if some of these people in here may have seen this, but the NTSB added professionalism to its top 10 most wanted. So you all read the NTSB's report, and to get on the top 10 is pretty significant. So for professionalism to get on the top 10, the NTSB looked at that and said, this is significant enough, we need to raise this to the highest level and get as much focus on it as we possibly can. So when they looked at it, quote, a disturbing number of individual incidents of non-compliant behavior, intentional misconduct, or lack of commitment to essential tasks. Basically doing what you're supposed to be doing at any given time. Now, professionalism, what is it? There are so many different definitions out there that I ran across when I was doing the research for this. So I boiled it down to Rex's definition. Doing the right thing every time. Even when it doesn't seem to really matter. That's the key. When you're out there by yourself and you're doing your thing, are you cutting corners? Are you doing things that are going to maybe not hurt you that day, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road? And even when no one else is watching you. When we're flying with the FAA and they're in the other seat, or we're flying with a check airman, or we're flying with somebody else, we're usually on our best behavior. You're really focused on doing the right thing. You got the checklist in your hand. We're out there by ourselves, we're doing a pre-flight, and that checklist may be in the cockpit somewhere. It may stay on page 1 the entire time that we went flying and came back, because we never pulled it out. That's where we get into that habit transfer, good habit, bad habit. Now, everybody here has heard of the Challenger disaster that NASA had. Have you heard the term normalization of deviance? And if you haven't heard that term, I recommend you Google it, look it up, and there's a bunch of different really good presentations on that. Basically, it's a deviation that's out of norm that at some point becomes normal. Whoops. I didn't do it. There we go. So, helicopter pilots, being one of those, I can tell you that most people I talk to, you use the verbiage normalization of deviance, they're like, the heck is that? So I came up with a Rex phrase. You've seen wrong so long, you forgot what right's supposed to look like. That's what we get into. We start down that path of bad habits, and all of a sudden, normal for us is doing the wrong thing. We just don't remember that it was wrong. So we look at professionalism. Where does it come from? What causes non-compliant behavior, intentional misconduct, and the lack of commitment to essential tasks? And how does that affect our decision-making process? So, I try to boil things down so me as a helicopter pilot can understand it. Professionalism and making sausage. My wife made the mistake of buying me a smoker one year, and of course I had to use it a lot. One thing I've never done in my life was make sausage. My first batch was absolutely awful. I couldn't even eat it. Dog didn't like it. So when we look at making sausage and comparing that to professional, what goes into making sausage? What goes into professionalism? Training, definitely. It's a huge part of professionalism. Education, our experience, crew rest, making good decisions because we have a sharp mind, because we got the sleep we needed the night before and we weren't up for 48 hours. The equipment. The equipment's been checked, an A&P has signed off on it. We haven't been out under the shade tree doing backyard mechanic work ourselves, and it's not pencil whipping something. Flying it and watching it. Protocols. We're following manufacturers' recommendations, FAA regulations, and we're doing the right thing. Boom. Out comes professionalism. There's one key element missing here. The seasoning. And if you screw up the seasoning, your sausage is going to suck. No matter how much good stuff you put in that sausage, it's going to be terrible. What's the seasoning we're looking at today? Attitude. So when we look at how we make decisions, the eyeglasses we use when we make those decisions, it's our attitude on professionalism that influences what we do any given day. Now, trying to remember things like normalization of deviance doesn't roll off the tongue, doesn't stick to your mind. So I was like, how do I make this something that you remember? So we go through and we use visualization, verbalization, and rote memorization, pull it all together. So, recognition, give it a name. So we find the attitude that we don't like and we give it a name. We find the attitude we do like and give it a name. Give it a face, something visual, something you remember, something that burns into your memory. Then we define the attributes, right? So we work from 3 different levels of recognition on the idea of education and training. Now, the challenge was, is we took all the accidents that we reviewed, I've reviewed several thousands over the last few years, and said, what were the underlying attitudes in several of these fatal accidents that perpetuated this problem? And like I said earlier, some of these problems didn't happen that day. Some of these problems were put into motion years before. And that was one of the challenges we run into. Flying EMS, I flew 20 years in EMS. One of our biggest challenges is we don't fly 2 pilot in most cases. Single pilot operations. The only time I, as a pilot, would ever fly with another pilot was my check ride. That happened once a year, and that was usually about 1.8 hours. So if I were to develop a bad habit in my daily course of operation, being that I would never flew with another pilot, there was nobody else there that could say, hey, why are you doing it that way? And say, hey, there's a better way, or hey, you're skipping a step. I'm always a check airman, you know, I'm getting my check ride, I'm on my best behavior. Get the checklist in my hand, I'm doing everything by the book, studied, I'm ready. What am I doing when the check airman's not there? That's the important part. So, undesirable attitudes. Just like the NTSB, I looked at it and said, well, let's keep it simple. What are the top 10? So we started looking at accidents and putting different ones in different buckets. And then out of that, we came down with the 10 that we looked at. We have the paperboy, the fence sitter, arrogance, the hero, the assumption, the ostrich, the yes man, overconfidence, convenience, and complacency. Those are the ones that we found attitude-wise cause the most accidents worldwide. So, number 10, the paperboy. This guy is a well-meaning individual. All right? Smart, intelligent. Problem we run into relies solely on documentation. If you ever go into a program and you ask somebody, says, hey, tell me about your safety program here. As an ISBAO auditor, I'd always go in and try to get the oldest person and the youngest person in the program and see how close they were. If they go to the shelf and they pull off a book and they open it up and set it down on the table and say, well, here's our safety program. That's not a safety program. That's a document. This is a safety program. That's the key. Is it a mindset and a culture versus a document? If you rely solely on documents to save you and keep your people safe, you're setting yourself up for a cultural failure at some point in the future. When we have safety manuals, they're only as good as the people that use them. Do they understand them? And when I go in and I look and say, open the manual up, in most Part 135 operations, we do revisions, right? So when I go in and I see the manual, and then all of a sudden I look over here in the side pocket and there are 32 revisions that have never been filed, how good is the safety program? Because nobody's actually taken those, put them in, pulled the old ones out, and read the thing. Do you have a sign-off on it? Do you test people on it? Is it a requirement to review it on a certain annual basis? Policies are only as good as the people that follow them. Protocols, procedures, all great things, but without the culture to translate that into action, they're just pieces of paper. Individuals that are, quote, the paper were usually leadership people. Safety managers get into this trap. DOs, chief pilots, they rely too heavily sometimes on this. As a regional manager, one of the things I enjoyed the most was going out in the field and being with the pilots and seeing how they did things on a regular basis. You can see a whole lot more by keeping your mouth shut and sitting there for 12 hours and watching. All of a sudden they forget you're there and then they act normal. In a lot of cases, normal was perfect. I saw great things. Some cases there were some things we needed to fix. But that was the key. I wasn't sitting in an office just relying on paper. Now this is an attitude, individualized, can be institutionalized. Fence sitters. Indecisive. Don't make a decision. I once had a full bird colonel when I was in the Army say, Chief, I really don't care what decision you make. So either you attack, you retreat, you flank. Heaven help you if you stand still, because you're a target then and you'll die soon. Don't just stand there, make a decision. They don't want to make waves. Have you ever been in that position where somebody says, yeah, I know he's a good friend, I don't want to say anything because I know it's going to upset him. We'll talk about him in a minute, but that's one of those things you got to watch out for. Kindness can be an accident preventer or perpetuator. They don't want to take ownership of a situation. Individual comes into my office. They say, I hate this. I don't like this. I said, well, what are you doing about it? Obviously, you're passionate about whatever this is. Take ownership of it. Investigate it, do the research, come back, put 3 options on the table for me to look at, and we'll do something. Well, I don't want to go to that much trouble. They know it's an issue, they know it's a problem, but they don't want to take ownership and fix the problem. They just want to complain about it. I usually kick them out of the office after the second time. And they will not make a decision. EMS, flying at night in weather. You run into weather. You have a limitation. You have, say, 1,000-foot ceilings in 3 miles. All of a sudden, you're at 800 feet and you're starting to see wisps of clouds go by. Well, I'm under night vision goggles. I can still see okay. Am I in violation? Yeah, I'm in violation. But I'm in a comfort level because I've done that before and got away with it. I'm on the fence. Should I turn around? Should I land? Is it so bad that I should declare an emergency, climb up, go inadvertent IMC, file IFR, and recover at an airport? So there's 3 options. A lot of people just keep flying ahead and praying the weather gets better. Those are the ones we read about in the NTSB report. Arrogance. This is easy to get into. Young and old. I've seen some young guys come in cocky. I always say, confidence will keep you alive, cockiness will get you killed. You've got a fine line between those two. But arrogance is a dangerous thing. The 800-pound gorilla. We all have individuals that we've run into that are this individual. Look in the mirror, sometimes it's me. Sometimes I'm that guy. Rules are for the other guy. Well, I know what the rules say, but I've got away with this before. I've done it, and we've cheated a little bit, but it was okay because we got away with it. In the military mindset, we have a mission. And in the EMS world and also in the regular corporate world, that mindset is not something we really want to see. Mission versus flight. Mission is, there's some guys in a foxhole who are going to die if you don't get out there with the bullets to resupply them. A flight. There's a patient at a hospital. They're stable. We need to transport them from point A to point B. They're in a hospital. They're not dying. Weather's questionable. Is it a mission? No, it's a flight. And I always tell pilots, when you look at a flight, think of your defining factor of a 100-pound sack of potatoes. Would you risk your life for a 100-pound sack of potatoes? If not, why are you risking your life for some individual? And all the people in the back of that aircraft that are counting on you to make the good decision. You don't have to get the job done in some cases. Sometimes you have to learn to say no. And that's hard. That's a human issue, saying no. We see that as failure. That's a very hard thing to say. Fill in the blank. I've been flying longer than you've been. You've heard that, right? Sometimes it's a younger guy who's pointed something out that was bad. I had a base call me up. Hey, we got a problem with your new pilot. He's taken too long to get off the ground. Standard for an EMS pilot, based on a lot of different factors, generally, depending on the aircraft, the weather, the environment, we usually look to see that from the time the flight comes in on a pager to the time they take off, 8 to 10 minutes. So he's already pre-flighted in the morning. He's already checked the weather multiple times throughout the day. So all he's getting is, you got a patient, this is how much they weigh, you're picking them up here, you're dropping them off there. He checks the weather again, does his walk around, gets in, starts up, gets everything ready, off he goes. If the weather's in a status where he's got to check it, he checks the weather, may take a little longer. So I don't like to be a knee-jerk reaction, so I'll say, I'll come over and check it out. At the end of the day, the short story is, the other 3 guys that had been there forever were cheating. They weren't doing the things in the checklist they were supposed to be doing. They were getting off the ground quicker. The new guy was doing everything by the book and doing it right. So I have to go to the customer and say, hey, you know what, the new guy, he's doing it right. Your other 3 guys, they're going to be taking a little longer because now they're going to be doing everything by the book. So you have to watch that, because you hear that and they say, he's doing it wrong. I said, no, he's doing it right. Everybody else is doing it wrong. and then we set that bar that he has to clear at a totally unattainable height because it's not safe. So we get into that. Arrogance that's a challenge. Dealing with that, you will use all your personality to make that happen. The hero. Now, I don't see this too much in the corporate world or in the civilian market. We do see a lot of this sometimes in the EMS world. The hero. We talk about it, you'll hear it called the white knight syndrome. Back in the early 80s, we had a real problem with this. It's gotten better, but there's still, you have to watch out for it. There's a criteria that we don't tell a pilot what he's going for. So you're going to point A, picking up a 100-pound sack of potatoes and bringing it back to B. So when you're looking at the weather and the weather's right there on that line and you know, say, hey, in about an hour it's going to be absolute crap because it always is at this time with this weather, you're going to say no. Now, if I told you there's a 2-year-old little girl who just had her lower legs completely amputated, and if we don't get her to a hospital in the next 30 minutes, she's going to die, are you going to make a different decision? Is that going to influence your decision-making process? That's what was happening. Guys were going out and risking their lives, risking their crew's lives because they knew too much. And we got into that hero, the white knight. We save lives. I said, no, you don't. So you transport patients. So the life that you save, the most important life that you save is yours. Because if you save your life, that medic and the nurse that depend on you, you're going to save their life. That patient in the back, guess what? You're going to save his life probably too. So don't risk going out when you know you shouldn't. And that's hard to do. Because a lot of the people in the EMS world coming out are military and they're in that mission mindset, right? And they're like, gotta go. No, you don't. And in a challenging environment for us, we fly single pilot. Well, all the guys coming out of the military today have never flown single pilot. They've all flown pilot, co-pilot. Now you take away that person in that left seat and throw a medic in there that doesn't know how to fly. He's got one set of controls. Are you putting him behind the power curve a little bit now? So we have to watch for this. We have to be careful of this. We don't tell them, you know, you're going to die. I've actually gotten called on my cell phone. Turn the flight down. Cell phone rings. Some doctor on the other end somehow got my number. Hey, I've got an asthmatic 4-year-old here that if you don't fly her, she's going to die. And I'm like, dude, I can't. It's 500 foot and a quarter. I can't even get out of here. So those are things that our pilots deal with that we have to watch for and protect them from. Assumptions. This is a challenging one. I've been there, done this. You know, say making the assumption, make an ass out of you and me. I like the verbiage trust but verify. Never ever trust 100% and not verify. Oh yeah, I did the pre-flight and I checked it and it's all good to go. All right, good. I'll go out and do my own pre-flight. Thank you very much. Somebody always asks me, as an AMP mechanic, I'm a little bit more thorough on a pre-flight sometimes. Chief pilot goes, I just watch you do your pre-flight. Are you going to buy that aircraft or are you going to fly that aircraft? My response was, Chief, when I take off, I bought that aircraft. Lock, stock, and barrel, because when it crashes, they're not going to come after you. They're going to come after me. Because the pilot command, guess what? Ultimate responsibility, period. He is the first line that the NTSB and the FAA go to. You were the pilot command. You knew it was wrong before you took off. Why'd you take off? So when we look at the assumption, half the story. I used to beat my managers upside the head. They'd get something from a customer and they'd go over and, you know, take a pilot or a mechanic and use them as a whipping boy. And then I'd come back behind them and say, you didn't ask all the other pieces of the story. So there was other problems here that you didn't look at. You just reacted. You took half a story and you blew it into this mushroom cloud now I have to deal with. So take your time. Go in and investigate. Look to see exactly what's going on. In most cases, he may be wrong, but there may be a lot of other pieces to this puzzle that you didn't take the time to figure out. Overreact, the knee-jerk reaction, we get that a lot. Someone else already checked it. We'll talk about this in one of our accident reviews. You go out in EMS, You may be on a 7-day hitch. Now every day you're supposed to pre-flight that helicopter. So you pre-flighted it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and the aircraft hasn't moved. Sunday comes around and you're tired, and it's like, man, I already pre-flighted. The aircraft hasn't moved. It should be okay. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Did you know that they had a problem on a flight, or they went flying the night before? Did you pay attention to that? Mechanic was behind it. He didn't get the maintenance done on Friday. He wanted to do it. He came in on Saturday night, did it, and you came in, and he'd already been on the aircraft, and you didn't read the daily maintenance record to see that he'd been in there, and you just assumed that it was still in the same shape that it was when you left it the day before. We get into that lazy attitude. So you get into the assumption, and then we also get into that situation where something happened that we didn't count on. It was fine last week. Should be okay today, right? Many accidents, the thing was working perfectly for the last 6 years, and all of a sudden that one instant, boom. I had governor decide to crap out on one engine one day. I'd shot that approach multiple times. Luckily, I had really good mentors who beat me upside the head and made sure that when I was shooting all my approaches, I wasn't going too fast, I wasn't too steep, I knew exactly how much power I had, I knew exactly what the environmental factors were that were influencing what I was doing. And on short final, about 200 feet up, I would say 600 feet from the deck, with a heavy load on a hot day, my number one engine went pucker factor. Luckily, my airspeed and my descent rate were such, I just kept what I got, took it on, stuck it in the middle of the pad. Life was good. We replaced the engine. That was all good. Number one power governor took off, took it out. I walked away. But if I'd have been at a steep approach, if I would have been going too fast with that weight and those environmental conditions, I'd have went right through the LZ into the hospital, which was only about 100 feet past the LZ. So it's one of those things. You do it right every day. For that one time, something goes wrong. It only takes one. The assumption, the mother of all screw-ups. I told my wife I would make this a clean presentation. The ostrich. Goes without saying kind of what this individual is. And we see this as a problem throughout the industry. Most of you probably know who Sergeant Schultz is, or was. Hogan's Heroes. I gave this lecture the other day to a bunch of young people, and not one person in that room knew what I was talking about. I was like, damn, I'm old. Sergeant Schultz. I know nothing. Don't want to know. I don't see it. It didn't happen. Don't see, don't tell. If I do see it, well, now I have to do something about it. The ostrich. Bury your head in the sand and pretend there's not a problem. In most accidents that we reviewed, someone in the organization knew the problem existed but never spoke up. They had that one piece of information, that key piece of information that would have broken that chain prior to the accident. And that's the challenge we get into. And one of the ones I'll talk about here in a minute, I was face to face with this. And it was pretty ugly. The yes man could be a pilot, could be an entire operation, could be the guy out there, the business manager. I work with businessmen, non-flying people. It drove me insane because they made promises we couldn't keep. So they overpromise. It's like, oh yeah, we can do that, not a problem. They overreach. Oh yeah, we can do that much. Well, if we can do this, we can definitely do this much too. And I'm looking at it, it's like, well, there's not enough hours in the day to squeeze that all in. It's impossible. Then we get into, the pleaser. Well, if we say no, they're not going to be happy. And if they're not happy, they are a client, they could go somewhere else. Well, there's certain clients that you really should look at and think really, really hard, do you want to keep that client? Because they will get you in trouble if you keep going with them in some cases. No problem. I hear that. Oh, yeah, no problem. We can do that. I'm looking at him going, Did you do your performance planning? You said you do understand that we're at 9,500 feet and you're flying a 206 Jet Ranger, right? And they want to pick up this over here and take it up there? No problem. Yeah, I've seen that. Often the person that says that, though, is not the one responsible for delivering on the promise. So we get into the situation where the business people say, yeah, we can do this. And then all of a sudden these pilots and the mechanics or the crew are trying to deliver on a promise that should never have been made, and they're getting outside of that risk bubble. They're extending themselves and their equipment beyond what they were supposed to. So it's always important. I always work very closely with the business development people when they wrote a contract that it went through the ops department and the maintenance department. So what my question is what he promised, can we deliver on, number one? Can we do it safely, number two? And is it actually legal, number three? You may laugh and say, legal? There were some business promises made that when you actually put them next to the regulations say, you can't do it that way. So you have to be careful. So I always involve as many people as possible when we're writing contracts. But the yes man can get you killed. Overconfidence, we all suffer from this. This is an easy trap to get into. Like I said, cocky over here, confident over here. Cocky and confident. Cocky, they're very similar. Confident person knows his limitation. The cocky guy thinks he can surpass those limitations. Watched a guy kill himself trying to do a hammerhead stall on the Bell 206. He did the stall, but he forgot that when you turn that aircraft around doing the return to target that he was attempting to do, you have to have a certain amount of altitude. And he was short by about 100 feet. Stuck it right in the dirt, killed all 4 people. It's like, why in God's name were you doing that in the first place? He had done it by himself, but it was July, it was hot, he had extra people on board, he had a full tank of gas, and he didn't take any of that into consideration, and he was overconfident. He was cocky. So he did it before, he got away with it before. So we look at habit transfer, good habit, bad habit, doesn't matter. The first time you do something is the building block for creating a habit. So always make sure when you're doing it, you're doing the right habit, because once you start doing it 5, 10, 20, 30 times, that which you do the most is what you're going to do in an emergency. So if you've been doing it wrong for 3, 4 years and all of a sudden something goes wrong, that's where you're going to go. So, but if you did it right, there's no thought. It's muscle memory. Boom. So you got to be careful of the habits you build up. Don't create false sense of security down the road. I hear this. Oh yeah, a piece of cake, we can do that. If you ever hear the phrase, hey y'all, watch this, get out of the helicopter as quick as you can. 20 years in EMS, we saw a lot of those guys. Hey, yeah, I'll never forget the guy we picked up that him and his buddy were playing catch with a rattlesnake. He caught that rattlesnake 4 times before he passed out, because the rattlesnake bit him every time he caught him. It's amazing how good of an idea it got after about 10, 12 beers. But if you ever hear, hey, watch this, step back a long way, because you don't want to be involved in the accident that's about to happen. Convenience. This has caused me god-awful amount of heartache and pain in years past, because someone tried to make something convenient for them or somebody in the crew or for somebody else. It'll be quicker. It'll make it easier. This will save time. We'll save money. I got the best advice from one of my mentors, who has since passed. He said, if you've just discovered a way to save money, save time, make things easier and make things more convenient, call me, because you're about to screw up. True. So convenience, we get into this form. I watched a guy flying an aircraft, good guy, flying an EC-135, had a lot of time, went into a backup, didn't have a lot of time in that aircraft, was a bigger, heavier, had the big surfboard, the BK-117, and it has a big tendency to translate to the right, especially with crosswind. So he's landing at a fuel pump, comes in, lands, he's on the ground, it's fine, everything's perfect. Doing it with about a 15-knot crosswind. All of a sudden he goes, wow, that's a long way to drag that hose over to the aircraft to put fuel in it. Let's pick up and see if we can get a little closer. Picks up the aircraft, slides over 10 feet. As he's setting the aircraft down, a little bit of gust comes in and he drifts about another 3 feet. Right into the standpipe on the pump and destroys all 4 rotor blades. It's $63,000 a piece. Plus the sudden stoppage on the engines. He was making it more convenient for him. He was already on the ground, he was already safe, everything was perfect, and he just decided at that second, well, I don't want to walk all the way over there and drag that hose. I'll have to sweat. Boom. Has the accident. Necessity's evil twin is convenience. You hear that necessity is the mother of all invention? Convenience is the evil twin. Convenience will kill you. When you found a way to make it easier, quicker, or better, stop, call me, you're about to screw up. And complacency. Number 1. And we've all talked about this. We all understand what complacency is, and we all have to guard against it. It's one of those things we guard against every day of the week. We run into this monster every day. It's the good habits that we form early and maintain that keep us from getting into the trap. So we look at, never had a problem here before. So I do audits. I hear that a lot. So everything's great. We've never had a problem before. It's never happened here. We've never had an accident. Woe be unto you when you utter those words. Because I don't know how many people I've seen in the industry that have said, we've never had an accident before, and all of a sudden within the next 12 months, they have an accident. There's a hospital program down in Memphis, Tennessee, great group of people, love them to death. They've been flying for 15 years, won several awards. Basically said something like this: they had 2 fatals in less than 1 year. During the audit, we went in and looked and said, well, you started here, but you never grew. 15 years you were doing it the exact same way, and you never grew. And at some point it caught up to you. That was the key. Everything catches up to you at some point. That's the way we've always done it. Have you ever heard those words? That's a challenge. You hear those. I hear these key phrases sometimes when I do audits and I see red flags popping out of the back of my head. It's like, okay, well, let's just see if that's working for you. Is that really what you should be doing, or is there something better? So those are the top 10, right? So there were, I'm afraid to say, hundreds of accidents that I could have chosen and looked at and evaluated and presented today. Each one of the 3 that I'm going to present to you, I could spend an entire week on. I'm going to give you the high points. The accident number is up in the upper right-hand corner if you want to go read the full NTSB docket information on that. Be my guest. It'll make you sad. It makes me sad. So in the first accident review, this happened in 2001, Decatur, Texas, aircraft BK-117C1. BK-117 uses Lycoming 750 shaft horsepower engines. 2. Good aircraft. German aircraft. Built like a tank. Lots of titanium. This thing will take a licking and keep on ticking. I got about 3,000 hours in a BK. Love this aircraft. It's one of the few that was actually designed for the military originally. Never really saw much action in the military and was fully aerobatic. It is a great aircraft. Helicopter experienced a dual engine failure during cruise flight due to fuel starvation with a full tank of fuel. Here's one of the idiosyncrasies of this particular aircraft. You have the panel that has rheostats attached to the lighting. So you can dim the lighting, bring it up to a higher intensity, or dim the lighting. There's 3 rheostats. Now, there is one slight thing that you got to keep in the back of your mind is the rheostat is in an off position, it's off. When it's in an on position, it goes from 0 to 100%. If you leave it at 0, those same 3 rheostats also control your caution warning panel. Now, in the checklist, it says check rheostats, daytime, insure off. Okay. Now, in a BK-117, there are 5 fuel tanks. There's 2 supply tanks. One goes to the left, one goes to the right engine. If you were to only use those tanks, there's about 20 minutes of gas, maybe a little less on a given day, in each tank for each engine. So you have a forward main, a rear main, and then a forward reserve that all feed to those. To feed to those, there are 2 switches called transfer pumps. In the checklist, prior to takeoff, ensure both transfer pumps are on. Because if you don't have those on, you're just going to use what's in the supply tank. All right? Now, in the checklist, now on the panel, there are 2 caution lights. Transfer pumps. When they're not on, those 2 lights are on. So they try to make it as impossible as they can not to take off with the transfer pumps on. So in this particular case, individual goes out, gets in the aircraft, does not pre-flight, takes off, 20 minutes down the road, his left engine quits. Assumes that it's an engine failure, rotates the aircraft to the right, to a field, to land. Well, as soon as he did that, the tank on the right cavitated because he turned, other engine quit. Crashed a perfectly good aircraft with a full tank of fuel on board. Now, the backstory. I knew this guy. He's a friend of mine. He flew at the program I flew in. He was at a different program. Now, remember that, what I said? EMS pilots fly single pilot. We never get to fly together. We rarely ever fly with another pilot, so I did not fly with this individual. I did not see him do or do not do what he was supposed to be doing, i.e. a pre-flight. However, there were other people who saw it but didn't say anything. In this particular case, I actually had a paramedic come up to me the day after the accident occurred. Luckily, he didn't kill anybody, but he never walked again. He was in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And he said, I knew something was going to happen to him because he never pre-flighted his aircraft. All right. You can only imagine how angry I was. Why didn't you say something? I said, yes, he caused the accident. I said, but you were just as responsible because you didn't say a word. Ostrich, right? How about the arrogance in the individual? Didn't pre-flight. In this particular morning, early morning, first flight, the night before, the mechanic had come in and done maintenance on that aircraft because the lights weren't working on the night flight for the NVG flight. He was playing with the rheostats. The day before, the individual had pre-flighted, but he'd never flown, and he'd used the checklist. He comes in and says, well, it looks good. Off he went. First thing in the morning. Flight came in like right after he got there. He should have delayed a little bit, got the pre-flight done, but no, he took off. Early morning, headed west, sun's over his right shoulder, right on the cockpit. Lights were at the lowest end of the dimmer setting. They came on, they did what they were supposed to. They checked, they said the lights work. Transfer pumps were not on. 20 minutes later, he ran out of fuel. So in that instance, we look at the attitudes that caused the accident. It didn't happen that day. So the ostrich knew about this 3-4 years prior to the accident. Other people had saw this but never said anything. The individual himself, the arrogance was, I didn't have to pre-flight. I could do this and get away with it because I did before. The assumption was, nobody's done anything to the aircraft. I checked it. It's good to go. He didn't look at the daily maintenance record to see that maintenance had been done because he had just got there. Ooh, flight came in. Well, we can't delay. We can't wait. We got to go. And that rush mentality put him in a situation where he didn't know that there had been maintenance done. He didn't look at the DMR. Overconfident. He'd gotten away with it before. This is how I've done this. Years. It's not something that happened overnight. Convenience. Takes time to do a pre-flight. Remember that? And complacency. You see the stair steps we get into, the domino effect, if you will, on these attitudes. So when we get into looking at the pilot decision making, then I get into this, was it the pilot that screwed up? Did he fail? Or did we as an industry and a culture fail the pilot for not stepping up? You see how that kind of intertwines? That's a serious issue that we deal with on a given day. We have pilots that get hung out to dry, and then when you really dig down to the last detail in the accident, say, wow, we basically crucified the individual that we set up to fail in the first place. All right, the second accident is an S-76A+. Now, the S-76 is a really good aircraft. I like the aircraft. I've flown a little bit in it, not a lot. It's a great IFR platform. Now, the A+ was one of the originals. Not the strongest aircraft in the inventory. Now, this aircraft happened to be in Miami, Florida on a nice hot August day. EMS aircraft, fully loaded with equipment, taking off with a full load of fuel and 2 pilots. A little heavy. Was not able to achieve what we call out-of-ground effect power. So in-ground effect versus out-of-ground effect for a helicopter, if you've never heard the term. In-ground effect, you're close to the ground, you're getting a little bit of a bounce back and push up from the air. As the air comes out of the rotors, it hits the ground, friction and surface tension, push it out. That actually helps kind of a buoyancy to the aircraft. Once you get to a certain height, and in most cases it's 1.5 times the rotor diameter of that particular airframe, you no longer get the assist of in-ground effect. What that means, it now requires you and the aircraft specifically to produce more power. So when we look at performance and planning, we look at what's in-ground effect available, what's out-of-ground effect available. He did not have out-of-ground effect power. Too hot, too heavy. Basic performance planning. Challenge was, helicopter impacted building shortly after takeoff. Now you first read that and you're like, how in God's name do you hit a building? I mean, that's like a stationary object. How do you do that? So when this location, this is a hospital, heliport was first built, there was a nice clean approach departure path, good airspace. Over time it got encroached by additions. So that location now has a building on all 4 sides. There's no way in and out of there that meets FAA airspace criteria. What we look for in airspace for a heliport is a surface of the 8-to-1. So for every 8 feet, you come up 1 feet. And that goes out 4,000 feet from the edge of what's referred to as a final approach and takeoff area. And it expands from that out to 500 feet wide. It's basically a ramp in the sky. We want to make sure there's no obstructions in there, so when the pilot comes in and he's shooting about an 8-degree approach, because that's 7.125, he's got a clear approach. There wasn't any angle that the individual could come and go out of here that was clear. Now, in this case, we got into a situation where everybody knew it was a problem. We don't have the power to get off the ground. We don't have that out-of-ground effect power to get up over the building and take off. We have to do an airspeed takeoff, then get our altitude. The only way to do that was fly between 2 buildings. The distance between the 2 buildings was 54 feet. Not 56 feet. Rotor diameter at an F-76 is 44 feet. All right? He basically, based on my measurements and the NTSB, he had 6 foot of clearance either side of the rotor system. Buildings are 4 stories. So this guy, not only is he going between the buildings, he has to take off, go to the left, turn to the right, go between the buildings, and then climb up. Now in the NTSB hearing, this is the best part. He admitted to doing this at least 50 times in the past. All right? So you see got this overconfidence. We got this individual, and you know, in the hearing it came out that they were told, the pilots were told that you have to do this because we don't want to lose this contract. the hospital's not real happy with it. If we say no, we can't fly, well, we may lose this contract. So we're making promises. We know it's tight, deal with it. Now, the NTSB lawyer, and this, I wasn't involved in this one, but I read through this. In the accident scenario, so this guy had done this. So we talk about the one thing that changed, right? So in takeoff, he's going between the buildings. Well, there's a sidewalk between the two buildings, and there's an awning that covers that sidewalk. As he's going over, and understand an S-76 produces a significant amount of downwash. Anything that's not nailed down is going to probably flap, come up, or move. The awning, as he's going over it, and I was thinking, well, how high would he have been? When I did the math, he was probably about 5 feet over the top of this cloth awning. The side of the awning's coming up, right? And he's worried that this thing's going to get tied up in his tail rotor. Well, heck, he's between the building now, and he looks down. He's got 6 foot of play either side. What's the obvious thing that everybody does when they're driving or flying and they get distracted and they turn? Amen. Boom, right into the building. Luckily, everybody walked away. Hit the building, crashed, destroyed the aircraft. This was one of those setups. This has been going on for a long time. We'd allowed this to happen. Everybody saw it going on. So we look at the prevailing attitudes. Yeah, we can do it, no problem. Yeah, we know it's bad, but we're going to continue to do it. Same thing that happened to NASA when the Challengers. Yeah, we know there's a problem, but we'll lower the standard and see if it'll pass. They'll never pass. Assumption. I got out of here the last 49 times. Again, only takes one thing. There's one change, boom. Now you're in trouble. I always tell students when we're flying, I said, when you take off and when you're flying, I said, you need to have at least 3 to 4 options in your pocket at every moment. All right, boom, you have an engine failure. Okay, I can do this. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay, I can do that. Or, I got this one too. You're always looking for all those options. I said altitude, fuel, speed, all those things give you options. I said always make sure you have an option in your pocket. I said if you don't have an option in your pocket, you're assuming you're going to get away with it and something goes wrong, you're going to die. So always plan for the worst case. Convenience. It was inconvenient to tell the hospital that we couldn't land there anymore and they needed to land somewhere else. Now they did build a new rooftop heliport the year after. Everybody knew there was a problem, so everybody was putting their head in their sand. They didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to rock the boat. Luckily, nobody died. Overconfidence. In the NTSB hearing, the co-pilot, love co-pilots. Yep, he did it. I knew there was going to be a problem. I knew where something was going to go wrong. He was like rolled over in a heartbeat. Complacency, definitely. So you can see where attitude starts to actually influence our decision-making process. Now, it can be a positive if we do it right, but in these cases, it was a negative. Now, the last accident, this happened in Indianapolis. I know some of the pilots that were involved in this, talked to them at length about this. There is actually, not only is there an NTSB investigation, there was a major lawsuit out of this, and it's an interesting read if you get the chance to look this up. So in Indianapolis we have a very large corporate owner who has a helicopter and some fixed wing, and they're doing corporate operations. In this case, an AS-365 into a Dolphin. Good aircraft, nice platform. So they're doing corporate operations, and one day the passenger was fatally struck in the head by the aircraft main rotor while disembarking to board another aircraft. Ugly situation, really ugly situation. In this case, they'd landed at the international airport. They'd been in and out of there all the time. It's good location, sterile environment, airside. Couldn't ask for a better situation. But policy was being driven by the client, the customers, not by aviation. Policy was, well, we know that the best practice is to shut down the aircraft, wait till the rotor blades stop, and then get off the aircraft, or get off the aircraft and leave the aircraft at idle while the rotor blades are still turning. We don't want to do that. This is the client. This is business people telling aviation what to do. We want you, the pilots, to shut the aircraft engines off so we don't have to listen to the noise, and while they're coasting down, we're going to get off. Now, if you've ever watched a helicopter blade, when it's rotating and it doesn't have that power, it doesn't have that centrifugal force maintaining rigid out there, all of a sudden you get a little wind, you start seeing this, it starts to flex. It's designed to. It's designed to flex in some cases a lot. Now, in a dull fiend off the nose of the aircraft at 12 o'clock, that blade's tilted down. Static is 6 feet 5 inches. So now blades are turning, the aircraft comes in, he lands, points it into the wind. Guess what? They have a wind of 20 knots, or 14 gusting to 20. Aircraft's fine, it's dealing with it fine. Over here off the left is his Learjet. He's waiting to get on. So he gets out of the helicopter. Pilot assumes that the ground crew's taking care of this guy. He gets out the right side, makes a beeline to the aircraft over here. So he cuts across the front of the nose right underneath the main rotor. He happened to be 6'4". Now he's probably about 6 foot even. Killed him, dead. I talked to the EMS guys. He said it was just god-awful ugly. So these guys are assuming somebody else is taking care of this guy. Now, this is not the first time this guy did this. He'd been chastised multiple times not to cut in front. Go 90 degrees, get clear of the rotor system, then go forward. But he kept doing it. He was the boss, right? I mean, you don't want to tell the boss not to do something. You may be looking for a new job. Well, now the boss is dead, and they no longer have any helicopters because of some issues, and they don't even have any aircraft because of some issues. But they don't have jobs anyway. So in this case, we look at the underlying factors, prevailing attitudes of the fence sitter. We have that. The guy knew there was a problem. In the dissertation that was in the legal side, they talked about it at length. Yeah, we knew this was an issue. They tried to sue the manufacturer, and the manufacturer, no, they were doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing. Arrogance, the individual said, hey, you know what? I own the aircraft. I can do whatever I want. This is, we as aviators or professionals, it's a tactful way. That's hard to do sometimes. Tactfully say, no, sir, you need to do this. I'm looking out for your best interest. I don't want you to get hurt. Don't want anybody to die. The assumption, we assume that the ground crew is going to take care of it. The ostrich, everybody just kind of put their head in the sand and off we went. Yes, man, we made promises we couldn't keep. Chief pilot, good guy, knew him, worked with him. Most of the pilots that were flying this operation were fixed-wing drivers first, got transitioned over to helicopters, and had very minimal amount of helicopter time, because they had already been working for the company. They didn't hire helicopter pilots. They had current fixed-wing pilots, so they ran through the transition. So most of these guys had less than 100 hours of helicopter time, which is interesting with flying complex aircraft. But good, competent pilots. They were allowing themselves to get pushed into a bad situation by their client. Convenience, yeah, it's easier. It's quicker. It saves time. I don't have to listen to that noise. Got us into a trap, and then we got complacent, and then one day, all of a sudden, boom, it happened. One thing changed. You get a good windy day, go across the front like you always did, and he's no longer here because of it. So, is it an individual problem? Yes? No? What do you guys think? When we look at attitudes in the environment, is it an individual problem? If an individual professionalism can be impacted by an undesirable attitude, what about crew? We work in EMS, very tight crews sometimes. Sometimes we work with the same people day in, day out. Same with the EMS, fire, Coast Guard. We get very tight-knit. A lot of times it's good to kind of rotate, just to kind of keep an eye on each other to make sure that, hey, you're doing it right. And it's also a positive, because there's been times I've been flying with a guy and I was like, well, I've never seen it done that way before. That's really a good idea. Let's bring that in front of everybody and see if we can implement that, because that's better than what we're doing right now. So you get to see new ideas. Programs. Can an entire program fall into this trap of attitude? How about a company? That's a company that was in Indianapolis. Yeah. We even worry about the entire industry. When NASA had the Challenger disaster and they got into the normalization of deviance, they looked at the entire industry of space and said, we have a problem, because we're allowing something to continue and perpetuate that we know is wrong and shouldn't. And there was a lot of pressure, you know, promises. They were made a lot of promises to Congress that they would keep that thing going no matter what. And it had a bad outcome. So in professionalism, what does it cost? Investment on your part, you know, cost-wise, zero. Now, I won't tell you that if you stand up and say no, that there might be some blowback. I've seen guys who have walked away from jobs, but they walked away. How much do you want to have the job, and how much do you want to live? You're the only one that could answer that. But the investment on your part is just doing the right thing all the time, even when nobody's looking, using the checklist, raising your hand, say, hey, I think there's a problem. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. But at least now we have the opportunity to investigate. What is the return on investment? Trust, support, reputation. Is reputation in the industry important? You as a corporation, you as an individual, you as a representative. Is your reputation important? Because it only, as they always say, it only takes one aw shit to erase 1,000 attaboys. No matter how good you are, the moment you have an accident, you're in the corner. That's it. Integrity. A lot of people sign good contracts because that company, that individual has integrity. I don't like him. I think he's an ass, but I tell you what, everything he does is 100% correct every single time. And I'd rather sign with him than somebody that's blowing sunshine up my skirt every day. Safety, definitely. So, the challenge, recognizing the undesirable attitude before the accident occurs. Don't be the ostrich. Also, it's a self-evaluation. Are you using your checklist when you're supposed to be? Are you doing a performance planning check? You and the wife are going out on a vacation. You're getting in your aircraft. You go to a field you've never been to before and it's surrounded by trees. You've got extra fuel on board. It's July, it's not September. It's hot. Do you have the length in that runway to get off? Did you do the performance planning to validate that? Well, I got out of here in September. I should be able to get out of here in August. Did you try to take off and miss? Run into the tree? So all those little things are playing factors. So it's self-evaluation. Then we look at the company and the industry as a whole, but it starts at the bottom. And it's a challenge. So any questions? Like I say, this has been recorded. If you're interested in reviewing those NTSB accidents, I highly recommend it. It'll depress you, but it's a lot of learning there to be had. You can go online, and that's why I put those numbers in there. Is any questions from anybody? You guys are an easy crowd. Yes, sir.
Nope, just 1 second here. I got a microphone for you.
I just wondered who won the lawsuit when the guy bonked his head on the helicopter.
Basically nobody.
That's like any lawsuit.
Pretty much. Only the lawyers got money out of that one. Because at the end of the day, the individual had died intestate, did not have a will, and it even got uglier thereafter. They actually, if you read the legal and some of the other reports, it even got to the point where they sued the city over the guy's cemetery plot because they didn't pay for it. So, yeah, that's an interesting read if you get the opportunity. So, I have a parting safety tip, if there's no other questions. How many people have heard of hypoxia and know all the different, well, this is a very rare form of hypoxia. We call this hyperrectal hypoxia. All right? Rare, often fatal form of hypoxia. Make sure that you're on guard for this type of hypoxia because it usually only gives you one opportunity to extract your head from your nether regions. Symptoms: poor judgment, bad decision making. If you ever find yourself uttering the phrase, hey y'all watch this, stop. If you ever say, hey, this will save time, this will save money, stop. The cure? Professionalism. don't suffer from this hypoxia. It will kill you in an instant. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. Go out, have a great time.